Greetings to our listeners, wishing you a good day. Let's begin today's story.
Walter Briggs did not cry when his wife died in his arms, or when he buried both his parents, or when he walked away from 28 years of protecting presidents. He broke the day he discovered that the best friend who had brought soup to his dying wife every single day, the man his daughter called Uncle Dale, might have been the one slowly poisoning her. And now that man was out of prison with 18 years of hatred sharpened into a plan, and he was coming for Walter's pregnant daughter and the grandchild Walter had waited his entire life to hold. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to the last good evening. The night before everything fell apart. Tuesday, 6:30. And the kitchen at Briggs's place smelled the way heaven probably should. Garlic butter melting over cast iron, rosemary and thyme from the little herb garden Nadine kept by the back door, the sizzle of shrimp hitting a hot pan, that sharp crack of oil and sea salt that made Walter close his eyes for half a second every single time. 40 years of cooking. And the sound still got him. Nadine leaned against the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder, watching him work. She had a way of doing that, resting her chin on her hand like she was watching something worth watching. 5 years married, and she still looked at him like he was interesting. After everything, after Margaret, after the years alone, after all the silence in that empty house, Nadine was the gift he never expected. "You are burning the garlic," she said, smiling. "I have never burned garlic in my life." July 4th, 2022. The Hendersons' cookout. That was a grill malfunction. That was you talking to Pastor Coleman about football instead of watching your shrimp. Walter laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen the way it always did, deep and easy, like a man who had finally learned how to relax. He plated the shrimp, drizzled the butter sauce, and set it on the pass. Through the window, he could see the dining room. 8 tables, all but 2 occupied. Not bad for a Tuesday. Briggs's place was not a fancy restaurant. No linen tablecloths or wine lists. Just good food, honest portions, and Walter at the stove. He had opened it 3 years ago with his retirement savings. Every penny he had earned in 28 years, protecting presidents for the Secret Service. Some men bought boats. Some bought lake houses. Walter bought a kitchen because the only thing he loved almost as much as his family was feeding people. His phone buzzed on the counter. Grace's name on the screen. "Daddy!" Her voice was electric, the way it got when she could not hold something inside. The ultrasound came back. Everything is perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes. The doctor says she is healthy as can be. She, a granddaughter. Walter set down the spatula and pressed his hand against the counter to steady himself. 64 years old, and the news of a baby girl still had the power to buckle his knees. "That is the best thing I have heard in my entire life," he said, and meant every syllable. "I want you in the delivery room, Dad. You and Nadine both. I want her first sight to be her grandpa's face. Wild horses could not keep me away, sweetheart." After they hung up, Walter stood still for a moment. On the shelf above the pass, next to the salt and the pepper grinder, was a small framed photograph. Margaret on their wedding day, 27 years old, dark hair and a smile that could stop traffic. She had been gone for 22 years now, and Walter still talked to her every night before he fell asleep. "You hear that? Maggie," he whispered. "We are going to be grandparents." A little girl, Nadine, appeared beside him. She never said anything when he talked to Margaret's photograph. She just stood close, her hand finding his arm the way it always did. That was one of the 1,000 reasons he loved her. She never competed with a ghost. She just made room for the living. They closed the restaurant at 9. Walter wiped down the counters while Nadine counted the register. He drove home through the historic district, past the church where he had met Nadine, past the park where he walked every morning, past the houses of neighbors who waved when they saw his truck. Pastor Coleman was locking up the church and raised a hand. Walter honked twice. Their shorthand for "see you Sunday," at home. Nadine made tea while Walter sat on the porch and listened to the crickets. The night was warm. The sky was clear. He thought about Grace and the baby. He thought about Margaret and what she would have said. He thought about how long the road had been from the empty years after Margaret died to this moment, sitting on this porch, with this woman inside making tea, with a granddaughter on the way. This is what earned looks like, he thought. Not given, earned. He slept well that night, deep and dreamless, the way a man sleeps when every piece of his life is exactly where it should be. The next morning, Walter arrived at the restaurant at 5:30, the way he always did. He parked in the alley, grabbed his keys, and walked around to the front entrance. He stopped. The front window was shattered. Glass on the sidewalk, catching the early morning light like scattered teeth. The door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, tables were overturned, chairs broken. The salt and pepper shakers he had collected from flea markets across Georgia smashed on the floor, and on the back wall, sprayed in red paint so bright it looked wet. 5 words. "You forgot." But I didn't. Walter stood in the doorway. His hands did not shake. His breath did not quicken. 28 years in the Secret Service had trained the panic out of him. But somewhere deep behind his ribs, in the place where instinct lived, something ancient and cold woke up. Something that recognized this. Not vandalism, not random. A message from someone who knew him, someone who had been waiting. He stared at those 5 words until the red blurred. Then he pulled out his phone and called the police, already knowing they would not understand what he was looking at. But Walter understood. He just did not know yet how much it was going to cost him. The police came, took photographs, wrote a report, and left. 2 officers who looked like they had already decided this was nothing before they walked through the door. Vandalism, they said. Probably kids. Happens all the time in the district. Walter stood on the sidewalk watching their cruiser pull away and felt a kind of anger he had not felt in years. Not the hot kind, the cold kind, the kind that sits in your chest and waits. He called his insurance company. They said they would send someone in 5 to 7 business days. 5 to 7 days with a shattered window and a broken door. Walter hung up and did what he had always done when the world failed to show up. He fixed it himself. By noon, he and Nadine had swept the glass, righted the tables, and covered the window with plywood. Walter repainted the back wall 3 times, but the ghost of those red letters still bled through like a stain that refused to forget. Nadine scrubbed every surface in the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because scrubbing was what she did when she was scared and did not want to say so. "We should get a security camera," she said without looking up. "I will call the company tomorrow, and maybe a better lock. Already on the list." They opened for dinner that night. 6 of their 8 tables filled. Not bad. All things considered. Walter cooked harder than usual, seasoning with the kind of concentration that comes from needing to control at least one thing in a world that suddenly felt uncontrollable. The regulars asked about the plywood window. Walter told them a truck had kicked up a rock. Easier than the truth. Easier than saying someone hated him enough to write it in paint. 3 days passed. The insurance adjuster came, asked questions that felt like accusations, and left without committing to a timeline. Walter replaced the window with his own money. $840 he had not planned to spend. Then the reviews started. The first one appeared on a Monday morning. 1 star. "Worst food I have ever eaten. Kitchen was filthy. Found a hair in my soup." Walter had never served soup in his life. He flagged the review and moved on. By Wednesday, there were 7 more. All 1 star. All from accounts with no profile pictures, no history, no other reviews. "Health hazard. Rude owner. Saw a rat in the dining room. Each one a tiny knife, and each one visible to every potential customer who searched for Briggs's place online." Walter sat at his desk that night, scrolling through the reviews with the reading glasses Nadine had bought him, feeling something tighten in his stomach. He had spent his career protecting people from threats they could not see. He knew what coordinated attacks looked like. These reviews were not organic. They were placed, deliberate, spaced just far enough apart to look natural to someone who was not paying attention. But who and why? The following Tuesday, a health inspector arrived without warning. A man in a county polo shirt with a clipboard and the kind of smile that said he was just doing his job. Walter let him in. The kitchen was spotless. It was always spotless. Walter ran it the way he ran everything, with precision and pride. The inspector found nothing. No violations, no concerns, no issues. He left with an apology for the inconvenience and a note that the inspection had been triggered by an anonymous complaint. Anonymous. Walter stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the word on the inspection report, like it was written in the same red paint as the wall. The following week, his main seafood supplier called. Eddie Walton, a man Walter had done business with for 3 years. A man who came to the restaurant on his birthday every year and always ordered the shrimp. "Walt, I do not know how to say this, but we have to suspend your account." "What are you talking about?" "We received a letter, official looking. Said your restaurant was under investigation for food safety violations. My boss says we cannot risk the liability." "Eddie, that is not true. I just passed a surprise inspection with 0 violations." "I believe you. Walt, I do. But the letter looked real. Had a county seal and everything. My hands are tied." Walter hung up and sat at the counter for a long time. The restaurant was empty. 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and not a single customer had walked through the door since lunch. The tables were set, the napkins folded, the salt shakers arranged the way Walter liked them, handles facing east, a habit from his military training days that Nadine teased him about. Everything in its place, except the people. He had built this restaurant from nothing. 61 years old when he signed the lease, hands shaking because it was every dollar he had. 3 years of 5 o'clock mornings, sore knees, burned fingers, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a stranger take the first bite and close their eyes. That was the reward. That small, sacred moment when food became something more than nutrition, when it became comfort. Now the tables sat empty. The kitchen was silent. And Walter Briggs, a man who had stared down threats to the President of the United States without flinching, sat alone in his own restaurant and did not know what to do. Nadine found him there at 4 o'clock. Still sitting, still staring. "We will figure it out," she said, the way she always said things, like she believed them even when the math did not add up. "Someone is doing this," Walter said quietly. "The vandalism, the reviews, the supplier, the inspection. This is not bad luck. Nadine, this is a pattern. Who would do this to us?" Walter shook his head. He did not have an answer. Not yet. That evening, Grace called. Her voice was bright, completely untouched by the storm gathering around her father. She talked about the baby, about nursery colors, about a crib she had found online. And then, almost as an afterthought, she mentioned something that Walter barely registered at the time. "Oh, Dad, I forgot to tell you. I found the most amazing real estate attorney. He is helping me find a house near the good school district for when the baby comes. He has been so patient, showing me places on weekends, even helped me with the paperwork. His name is Ryan. You would like him. Daddy. He reminds me of someone, but I cannot figure out who." Walter smiled at his daughter's excitement, told her he loved her, and hung up. He did not think twice about the lawyer named Ryan. He had no reason to, but somewhere in Charleston, South Carolina, 80 miles up the coast, a man who had waited 18 years for this moment sat in a darkened room, watching a screen full of one-star reviews, and smiled. Grace Briggs had always been the kind of woman who trusted too easily and forgave too quickly. Walter knew this about his daughter. He had raised her that way, and some nights, lying awake in the dark, he wondered if that was a gift he had given her or a wound he had failed to prevent. She was 34, 7 months pregnant, and alone more than she should have been. Her husband, Kevin, worked for a logistics company that sent him on the road 3 weeks out of every 4. Good money. But it left Grace in a house that echoed, folding baby clothes by herself, eating dinner standing up in the kitchen because sitting at an empty table felt worse. She never complained. That was the other thing Walter had taught her. Carry the weight. Do not let anyone see you bend. So when a young attorney named Ryan Cooper walked into the real estate office where Grace was looking at listings, and when he smiled at her the way sunlight hits a window, she did not think twice. she thought. Finally, someone who is actually helpful. Ryan was 28, clean-shaven, polite, the kind of man who held doors and remembered names. He wore pressed shirts with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, and he spoke slowly, like he had all the time in the world for whatever you needed to say. He had moved to Savannah 6 months earlier, he told Grace. Fresh start, new city, looking to build something meaningful. He was very good at saying the right things. Over the following 2 weeks, Ryan helped Grace visit 9 houses. He drove her to each one, opened the car door for her, carried the folders so she would not have to manage them with her pregnant belly. He remembered that she wanted a yard big enough for a swing set. He remembered that she liked natural light in the kitchen. He remembered her daughter's name before the baby was even born, because Grace had mentioned once, just once, that she was thinking about the name Margaret, after her mother. "Ah, that is a beautiful name," Ryan said, and something flickered behind his eyes so fast that Grace did not catch it. "Were you close with your mother?" "She died when I was 12. Cancer." "I am sorry." "My dad raised me alone after that. He was everything. Father, mother, coach, nurse. He used to pack my lunch every morning before school, even when he had to fly to Washington for work. He would make the sandwich the night before and leave a little note inside the bag." Grace smiled at the memory. Silly notes, like, "You are braver than you think," or "Save me a cookie." Ryan listened with what looked like genuine interest. He nodded in the right places. He let silences sit when they needed to. And then, very gently, like a man placing a single drop of ink into clear water, he said something. "Your father sounds like a complicated man. Secret Service. Right. That is a world most people never see. Must have been tough growing up with someone who kept so many secrets for a living." Grace blinked. "He did not keep secrets from me." "No, of course not. I just mean, that kind of work changes people. My father was in government too. I barely knew the real him until it was too late." Grace said nothing, but the sentence stayed. It lodged somewhere between memory and doubt, the way a splinter works its way under the skin so slowly you do not notice until it starts to ache. The following Thursday, Kevin was in Atlanta. Grace had a prenatal appointment at 3:15, and Ryan offered to drive. She said yes because the parking lot at the medical center was a nightmare, and because her ankles were swollen, and because, honestly, it was nice to have someone who showed up. In the waiting room, Ryan sat beside her reading a parenting magazine with the kind of focus that made the receptionist smile. When the nurse called Grace's name, Ryan stood up and touched her shoulder. Just his hand, resting there for a moment. Warm, steady, 2 seconds too long for a man who was supposed to be her real estate attorney. Grace did not pull away. After the appointment, Ryan drove her home. At the door, he said, "You deserve someone who is around. Grace, I hope Kevin knows how lucky he is." That night, Grace called Walter. Her voice was different, not upset, not angry, just off, like a piano with one key slightly out of tune. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" Always. Do you think people can really change, like, deep down, even after they have done terrible things? Walter frowned. Where is this coming from? Nowhere. Just thinking. Ryan, the attorney, he said something about his father today, about how people are not always who they seem. It made me wonder. What did he say about his father? Just that he did not really know him. That the man he thought his father was turned out to be someone different. Walter leaned back in his chair. The words sat uneasy in his chest, though he could not have said why. It was the kind of discomfort that had no shape yet, no name, just a feeling. The same feeling he used to get in the service right before something went wrong. A whisper from the part of his brain that never fully turned off. People can change, Walter said carefully. But most of them do not. Most of them just get better at hiding who they already are. That is kind of dark. Dad, that is kind of true, sweetheart. After they hung up, Walter sat on the silence of his living room for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the live oaks and made the Spanish moss sway like something breathing. He thought about the restaurant, the reviews, the broken window. He thought about the words on the wall. He thought about his daughter's voice and the name Ryan and the question about people changing. None of it connected. Not yet. But Walter Briggs had spent 28 years reading rooms and people and silences, and something in tonight's silence did not sound right. He just could not hear what it was saying. It came at 11:47 on a Wednesday night. A buzz on the nightstand. The screen lighting up the dark bedroom like a cold blue flame. Nadine reached for her phone the way everyone does when something arrives past 10 o'clock. With a quick breath and a racing mind already building the worst possibilities. The message was from a number she did not recognize. No text. Just 3 photographs. The first showed Walter sitting in a car with a woman. Dark hair, sunglasses, leaning close. The second showed them walking into what looked like a motel, his hand on the small of her back. The third was blurry, taken through a window, but it showed 2 figures close together in a room lit by a single lamp. Nadine stared at the images for a long time. Beside her, Walter slept the way he always slept, on his back, one arm across his chest, breathing slow and steady like a man with nothing on his conscience. She studied his face in the blue glow of the screen, the jaw she loved, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he laughed, the mouth that told her every single morning that she was beautiful. She put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back. She did not sleep. She did not. The thing about Nadine was this. Her first husband, Thomas, had been a good man until he was not. 13 years of marriage, 2 of which he spent loving someone else while sitting across the dinner table from Nadine and saying everything was fine. She found out the way wives always find out, not from evidence, but from absence. The way his eyes stopped landing on her. The way his laughter moved to a different room. Thomas died of a heart attack before they could divorce, and Nadine buried a man she no longer knew and spent 5 years wondering if love was just another word for not knowing the truth yet. Then she met Walter at church, and Walter was different. Walter looked at her like she was the only person in the room. Walter told her about Margaret, about the grief, about the lonely years, and he cried when he told it, which was how Nadine knew he was real. Men who lie do not cry about the women they actually loved. But now, at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, those photographs sat on her phone like poison in a glass of water, and the old fear, the one she thought she had buried with Thomas, opened its eyes. She did not confront Walter the next morning. She did something worse. She went quiet. The kind of quiet that fills a house the way cold fills a room when the heat goes out. Walter noticed immediately. "You okay?" he asked over breakfast. "Fine." "You sure?" "I said I am fine." Walter. He watched her move through the kitchen without meeting his eyes, and something in his chest tightened. He reached for her hand as she passed. She let him take it but did not squeeze back. That was new. In 5 years, she had always squeezed back. Sunday came, and they drove to First Baptist the way they always did. Walter parked in his usual spot, held the door for Nadine, and walked into the church expecting the same thing he had experienced every Sunday for 15 years. Handshakes, smiles, someone asking about the restaurant. Pastor Coleman's firm grip and warm eyes. What he got was silence, not the obvious kind, not people turning their backs or whispering behind their hands. Something subtler and worse. A half-second delay before a smile. A handshake that did not linger. Eyes that slid away a beat too fast. Mrs. Patterson, who had hugged him every Sunday for a decade, nodded from across the aisle and did not come over. Bill Henderson, his fishing buddy, looked at his shoes when Walter tried to catch his eye. Pastor Coleman shook Walter's hand at the door. "Good to see you, Walter," he said. And the words were right, but the music was wrong. The warmth was gone, replaced by something careful, something measured, like a man choosing his words before a deposition. "Jim, is everything all right?" Walter asked. "Of course. You and Nadine have a blessed day." And that was it. 15 years of Sundays, and Pastor James Coleman dismissed him with a sentence that could have been printed on a card. On the drive home, Walter gripped the steering wheel and said nothing. Nadine stared out the window. The silence between them was a living thing now, taking up space in the truck like a third passenger neither of them had invited. That evening, Nadine broke. They were in the kitchen. Walter was drying dishes. Nadine was wiping the counter, and the quiet had become so heavy that even the sound of the cloth on the granite felt loud. Then she stopped, set down the cloth, turned to him. "Who is she?" "Walter." He turned, dish towel in hand. "Who is who? The woman. The one in the photographs. Do not lie to me. I have been lied to before, and I survived it. But I will not survive it from you." "Nadine, I have no idea what you are talking about. What photographs?" She pulled out her phone and showed him. Walter looked at the images, and his trained eye saw what Nadine's wounded heart could not. The angles were wrong. The lighting was inconsistent. The woman's face was never fully visible, and the man in the photos, while wearing clothes similar to Walter's, had hands that were too smooth, too young. "These are fake," he said. "Nadine, these are fabricated. Someone created these to hurt us." "Who would do that?" "I do not know. But someone is trying to destroy everything we have. The restaurant, the reviews, the inspection, and now this." Nadine looked at him with eyes that wanted to believe but were not ready yet. Trust, once cracked, does not heal with a single conversation. It heals with time. And time was something Walter did not have. The phone rang the next morning at 8:15. Walter picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Briggs, this is Carolyn Webb from the Chatham County Department of Family and Children's Services. We have received a report regarding concerns about the safety of a minor in your care. We would like to schedule a visit to your home at your earliest convenience." Walter's hand tightened around the phone. His vision narrowed to a single point. In all his 64 years, through war zones and assassination threats and the death of his wife, no words had ever cut him the way these did. Because these words were aimed at the one thing Walter Briggs would die to protect: his granddaughter. A child who had not even been born yet. They came on a Thursday afternoon, 2 of them. A woman named Carolyn Webb, mid-40s, who carried a clipboard the way some people carry a shield, and a younger man who introduced himself as Daniel and never gave a last name. They wore county lanyards and practiced smiles and stood on Walter's porch like they had every right to be there. Nadine opened the door. Her face went pale the moment she saw the lanyards, and Walter stepped in front of her the way he had spent his entire life stepping in front of the people he loved. "Please come in," he said, "because that was what you did. You cooperated. You kept your voice level and your hands visible, and you answered every question, no matter how it burned going down." They sat in the living room. Carolyn opened her clipboard. Daniel took notes. "Mr. Briggs, we received a report alleging that you may pose a risk to a minor child. Specifically, your grandchild, who we understand is expected to be born within the next 2 months. That is correct. My daughter Grace is due in November. The report suggests a pattern of concerning behavior, including potential substance abuse and a history of aggressive conduct. Can you tell us about your background?" Walter folded his hands in his lap. 28 years of Secret Service training had taught him many things. How to clear a room in under 4 seconds. How to spot a concealed weapon from 15 feet. How to read a face and know whether the person behind it was lying. But the most important thing it had taught him was this: when someone is trying to provoke you, the most powerful thing you can do is stay still. "I served in the United States Secret Service for 28 years, he said. "I have never had a substance abuse problem. I have no criminal record. I have no history of violence outside of my professional duties protecting the president. I have raised my daughter alone since she was 12 years old, and I have never, not once, given anyone reason to question the safety of a child in my presence." Carolyn wrote something down. Daniel wrote something down. Neither of them looked at him while they wrote, and Walter understood the cruelty of that small gesture. It was designed to make him feel like a file, not a person, A case number, not a man. They asked about his marriage. They asked about his finances. They asked about his relationship with Grace. They asked whether he had ever been treated for anger management issues. Each question was polite, professional, and precisely calibrated to strip the dignity from a man who had spent 64 years earning it. Walter answered them all, every single one. His voice never wavered. His hands never moved from his lap when they left 45 minutes later. Carolyn handed him a card and said they would be in touch. Daniel shook his hand and said thank you for your time, as though Walter had invited them over for coffee instead of enduring the most humiliating 45 minutes of his life. He closed the door. Nadine stood behind him in the hallway, her hand pressed against her mouth. "Walter, I need a minute," he said. He walked through the kitchen, past the dining table where he and Margaret had eaten 10,000 meals, past the window where Nadine kept her herbs, past the back door and down the 3 steps to the garage. He pulled the door shut behind him and stood in the dark. The garage smelled the way it always did. Motor oil and sawdust and the faint sweetness of the wood polish he used on the bookshelves he built for Grace's nursery last month. His workbench ran along the far wall, tools hanging in order, each one in its place. Walter Briggs kept his tools the way he kept his life. Organized, purposeful, clean. He sat on the old stool beside the bench, the one with the wobbly leg he kept meaning to fix. He rested his hands on his knees and looked down at them. These hands had held Margaret's hand in the delivery room the night Grace was born, had felt the impossible smallness of his daughter's fingers wrapping around his thumb for the first time, had buttoned Grace's coat on cold mornings and packed her lunch every day for 6 years straight, and wiped her tears the night Margaret died, and held her steady when the grief tried to pull her under. These hands had cooked 15,000 meals, had shaken the hands of 4 presidents, had carried a flag-draped coffin when his partner in the service died in the line of duty, had built this workbench, had built those bookshelves, had held Nadine's face the night he told her he loved her. His fingers trembling because he had not said those words to anyone in 15 years, and he was afraid he had forgotten how. These hands had never, in 64 years, harmed a child, had never touched a woman in anger, had never taken a thing that did not belong to them. And today, a woman with a clipboard had sat in his living room and asked whether those hands were safe to hold his own granddaughter. Walter Briggs had not cried when Margaret died. He had wanted to. God. He had wanted to. But Grace was 12 and watching him with eyes that were begging him to be the thing that did not break. So he held it. He held it through the funeral and the empty bed and the years of silence and the mornings he woke up reaching for a woman who was not there. He had not cried when his father died, had not cried when his mother followed 3 months later, had not cried when he retired from the service and walked out of the building for the last time, carrying a box of commendations and a career that had mattered. But here, in the garage, sitting on a stool with a wobbly leg, surrounded by the tools and sawdust and silence of his quiet, honest life, Walter Briggs lowered his head into those hands and cried, not a sound, not a sob. just tears falling through his fingers onto the concrete floor, each one carrying a piece of something that had finally cracked. He cried for the restaurant that was dying, for the neighbors who would not look at him, for the wife who could not trust him, for the daughter who was drifting away, for the granddaughter he might never be allowed to hold. He cried because he had done everything right, and it was not enough. Because the world had decided to punish him for something he could not see and could not fight and could not name, and for the first time in his life, Walter Briggs did not know how to stand up. The garage door opened. A thin line of light from the kitchen fell across the concrete floor and touched the edge of Walter's shoe. He did not look up. He did not want anyone to see his face. Not like this. Not after 64 years of being the man who never cracked. Nadine did not say a word. She walked to the stool next to his, the one she used when she kept him company while he worked on his woodworking projects, and she sat down. The stool creaked. The garage was silent again. She did not ask if he was okay. She did not tell him it would be fine. She did not reach for him or try to wipe the tears he was pretending were not there. She just sat beside him in the dark, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and she breathed. 2 minutes passed, maybe 5. Time does not work the same way in the dark when someone you love is falling apart and you have chosen to fall with them. Then Nadine said something that changed everything. "Walter, I owe you an apology." He looked at her for the first time. Her eyes were red, but her jaw was set. She had the face of a woman who had just finished fighting something inside herself and won. "The photographs were fake. I knew it the moment you showed me, but I did not want to believe it, because believing it meant something worse was happening. Something bigger than a lie. And I was too afraid to look at it." "Nadine." "Let me finish." Her voice was steady now, the tremor gone. "I have been thinking about everything that has happened. The restaurant, the reviews, the inspection, the supplier, the photographs, and now this. The people from Children's Services coming into our home and asking whether you are safe to be around your own grandchild." She paused. "Walter, this is not bad luck. This is not coincidence. Someone is doing this to us, to you. And they are doing it on purpose." Walter sat very still. The words moved through him the way oxygen moves through blood, reaching every corner, lighting every dark place. She believed him, not because he had convinced her, not because he had shown her evidence or argued his case or begged. She believed him because she had looked at the full picture, and her own mind had drawn the only conclusion that made sense. And in that moment, sitting in a dark garage on a stool with a wobbly leg, Walter Briggs realized that the most powerful weapon he had was not his training or his contacts or his 28 years of experience reading threats. It was this woman sitting next to him who had chosen to trust him when everything around her was engineered to make her doubt. "You are right," he said. "Someone is behind this. All of it. Do you know who?" "Not yet." "Then find out." Walter looked at his wife. She looked back at him, and something shifted behind his eyes. Nadine saw it. She would tell him later that it was like watching a light switch on in a building she thought was empty. One moment, the man sitting beside her was a 64-year-old restaurant owner who had been beaten down by invisible hands. The next moment, he was someone else. Someone older than the man she married, but younger in a way that had nothing to do with age. Something in his posture changed. His back straightened, his shoulders squared, his jaw tightened in a way that was not anger but focus. The kind of focus that a blade has when it finds the sharpening stone after years in a drawer. The Secret Service agent was back. Walter stood up. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. A single clean gesture, like closing a chapter. Then he walked to the far corner of the garage, past the workbench, past the shelving unit where he kept paint cans and old tools, to a metal storage box on the bottom shelf. He had not opened it in 10 years. The lid was stiff. He pulled it free and looked inside. A black leather notebook, worn soft at the edges. His field journal from the last 5 years of active duty. Inside were names, phone numbers, secure email addresses, and notes written in the shorthand only another agent would understand. People he had worked with, trusted with his life. People who owed him favors and people who would help simply because he asked. A sealed envelope containing a USB drive with encrypted files from old cases. Insurance. He had called it at the time. Just in case. And at the bottom, beneath everything else, a photograph. 2 young men in matching dark suits, standing shoulder to shoulder in front of the Secret Service training facility in Beltsville, Maryland. Both grinning. Both full of the kind of certainty that only comes when you are 26 years old and the world has not yet shown you what it is really made of. The man on the left was Walter, thinner, darker hair, the same jaw. The man on the right was Dale Merrick, his best friend, his partner, the best man at his wedding. The man who held Margaret's hand in the hospital waiting room the night Grace was born. The man Grace called Uncle Dale, and loved the way children love the people who show up with ice cream and bad jokes, and the patience to sit on the floor and play for hours. The man Walter had sent to federal prison 18 years ago for taking money from human traffickers. Walter stared at Dale's face in the photograph. The easy smile, the confident eyes, the arm slung around Walter's shoulder like it would stay there forever. "Is it you?" Walter whispered. He already knew the answer. He had known it. He realized, since the moment he saw those 5 red words on the wall of his restaurant. "You forgot." But I didn't. That was Dale's voice. Dale's rhythm. Dale's rage wrapped in patience. The kind of anger that waits 18 years in a prison cell and sharpens itself on the walls. Walter placed the photograph on the workbench. He picked up the notebook and the envelope. He closed the metal box and stood in the garage, holding the pieces of a life he thought he had left behind. "Whoever is doing this," he said quietly. Not to Nadine, not to himself, but to the man in the photograph. "You made one mistake. You came after my family. And now I am coming after you." The number was 10 years old, stored in the leather notebook under the letter C, written in Walter's careful hand. Ron Caldwell, a man he had not spoken to since the retirement dinner at the Willard Hotel in Washington, where they had shaken hands and said the thing men say when they do not want to admit they might never see each other again. Call me if you need anything. Walter dialed at 5:30 in the morning. Ron picked up on the second ring, because men like Ron always picked up early. It was a service habit that never died. Caldwell. Ron, it is Walter Briggs. A pause. Not the confused kind, but the kind that happens when the past walks back into the room and sits down without asking. Walt, good Lord, it has been a decade. What is wrong? How do you know something is wrong? Because you do not call people for fun. You never did. Talk to me. Walter told him everything. The vandalism, the reviews, the health inspector, the supplier, the photographs sent to Nadine, the church, the children's services visit. He laid it out the way he had been trained to lay things out. Chronological, clean, free of emotion. Facts first, feelings later. Ron was quiet through all of it. When Walter finished, the line was silent for a long time. This is coordinated, Ron said. Professional. Whoever is running this knows what they are doing. They are dismantling your life in layers, starting from the outside and working in. Business first, then community, then marriage, then family. That is not random. Walt, that is a playbook. I know. Who have you made angry enough to do this? That is what I need to find out. I need your help. You have it. What do you need? I need you to run a name for me. Dale Merrick, former Secret Service, convicted 18 years ago for taking bribes from a human trafficking network. I helped build the case that put him away. Federal sentence. 12 years. Another pause. Longer this time. You think Merrick is behind this? I found a photograph of us in my garage last night, and the words on my restaurant wall. You forgot, but I did not. That sounds like Dale. That sounds exactly like Dale. Give me 24 hours. While Walter waited for Ron, he made another call. Frank Rossi, a private investigator in Savannah who had been recommended by an old colleague 3 years ago. Walter had hired him once before for a background check on a potential business partner. Frank was expensive, blunt, and thorough. He smoked too much and trusted no one, which made him exactly the right person for this kind of work. They met at a diner on the south side of town, a place where nobody from Walter's neighborhood would see them. Frank was already there, a cup of black coffee and a manila folder on the table. Tell me what you need, Frank said, skipping the pleasantries the way he always did. Someone is attacking my family. I need you to trace the source of fake online reviews, an anonymous health department complaint, a forged letter sent to my supplier, fabricated photographs sent to my wife, and a false report filed with Children's Services. I believe they all come from the same person. Frank raised an eyebrow. That is a lot of fronts for one person. This person has had 18 years in a federal prison to plan it? Who? His name is Dale Merrick. Former law enforcement. Former friend. I need everything you can find. Frank wrote the name on a napkin and slid it into his pocket. This is going to cost you. I do not care what it costs. Good. Because it is going to cost a lot. 22 hours after Walter's call, Ron Caldwell called back. His voice had changed. The easiness was gone. In its place was the clipped, precise tone of an agent delivering a threat assessment. Walt, Dale Merrick was released from federal prison 4 months ago. Early release, good behavior. He is living in Charleston, South Carolina. Registered address is a townhouse in the French Quarter area. And Walt, he has been busy. How busy? He registered a consulting company 2 months after release, filed taxes, got a driver's license, all clean on the surface. But I called a friend at the bureau. Off the record. Merrick has been flagged for suspicious activity, specifically communication with known associates of the same trafficking network he went down for the first time. Nothing actionable yet, but they are watching. Walter closed his eyes. Dale was not just out, he was operational, rebuilding, and everything that had happened to Walter over the past 6 weeks was not chaos, it was a campaign. There is more, Ron said. I ran his family connections. His ex-wife remarried and moved to Oregon. No contact. But his son, Walt. His son is interesting. I did not know Dale had a son, but name is Ryan Merrick, 28 years old. He changed his last name to his mother's maiden name after Dale went to prison. Goes by Ryan Cooper now. The kitchen went silent. Walter could hear the blood in his own ears. Ryan Cooper. The helpful attorney. The man with the perfect smile and the pressed shirts, and the hand that lingered too long on Grace's shoulder. Ron, Walter said, and his voice was very quiet. Ryan Cooper is with my daughter right now. He has been with her for weeks. He is helping her buy a house for my grandchild. The silence on the other end of the line was the kind of silence that comes before sirens. Get Frank Rossi on this immediately, Ron said. And Walt, do not confront him yet. If this is what it looks like, you need to be surgical. One wrong move and you push him deeper into Grace's life instead of pulling him out. Walter hung up and placed both hands flat on the kitchen counter. His knuckles were white. His jaw was locked. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to drive to Grace's house, drag Ryan Cooper out by his collar, and end this with his hands. But Walter Briggs had not survived 28 years in the Secret Service by following his first instinct. He had survived by following his second one, the one that said wait, watch, plan. And when you move so precisely that your enemy does not realize he is finished until he is already on the ground. Dale Merrick's son was standing next to Walter's daughter. That was not a coincidence. That was a chess move. And Walter was about to show Dale Merrick what happened when you played chess with a man who had spent his entire career thinking 12 moves ahead. Walter did not sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light off and the desk lamp on, the way he used to work during late-night intelligence reviews. And he read everything Frank Rossi had sent him on Ryan Merrick. The file was thin but sharp. Ryan Merrick, born in Alexandria, Virginia. Father, Dale Merrick. Mother, Sandra Cooper. Parents divorced 2 years after Dale's arrest, when Ryan was 12. Sandra moved back to her family in Savannah, took back her maiden name, and raised the boy alone. Ryan legally changed his last name to Cooper at 18. No criminal record. Graduated from the University of Georgia with a degree in business, not law. He was not an attorney, had never been an attorney. The man sitting in Grace's living room helping her find a house had no more legal expertise than the mailman. Walter read that line 3 times. Frank had pulled phone records from a contact at the bureau. Ryan had made over 200 calls to the federal penitentiary in Yazoo City, Mississippi, over a span of 8 years. Every Saturday, 15 minutes each, father to son, son to father. 200 conversations building something Walter could not yet see but could feel the shape of. The way you feel a storm before the sky changes. There was more. Frank had obtained visitor logs through a source he did not name. Ryan visited Dale 31 times during his sentence. The visit started when Ryan was 16 and continued until Dale's release. 31 face-to-face meetings across 12 years, each one logged, timed, and monitored by prison staff who noted nothing unusual. Just a boy visiting his father. Just a son who had not forgotten. Walter leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He understood now. Dale had not simply come after him upon release. Dale had been building his weapon for over a decade, sharpening his son like a blade, pointing him at the thing Walter loved most, and waiting. But that was not the worst part. The worst part came from a box of old photographs that Walter had not opened since Margaret died. He had kept them in the hall closet, sealed with tape, labeled in Margaret's handwriting. Family photos, 1994 to 2002. He pulled the box down from the shelf and sat on the floor with it, peeling back the tape with hands that were not quite steady. The photographs spilled out. Grace's birthday parties, Christmas mornings, beach trips to Tybee Island, Margaret in the garden, Walter in uniform, and there, scattered among the rest like shrapnel, photographs of Dale. Dale at Grace's 7th birthday, holding a plate of cake, grinning. Dale teaching Grace to ride a bicycle in the driveway. Walter out of frame because Walter had been in Washington that week. Dale at the kitchen table with Grace, helping her with homework. Margaret in the background, smiling, grateful that someone was there while her husband was away protecting the president. Dale carrying Grace on his shoulders at the county fair. Grace laughing, arms raised, trusting him completely. Walter picked up each photograph and studied it the way he would study evidence. Dates on the back, written in Margaret's hand. He counted. During the 4 years before Dale's arrest, when Walter was traveling frequently for work, Dale had been at the house at least twice a month, sometimes more. Always when Walter was gone, always with Grace, and Grace had loved him. Of course she had. She was a child, and Dale was charming, patient, funny. Everything a girl without a fully present father might need. Uncle Dale, who brought ice cream. Uncle Dale, who remembered her favorite cartoon. Uncle Dale, who sat on the floor and played cards for hours while Margaret rested because the cancer was already starting. Though no one knew it yet, Walter felt something cold move through his body. Not anger. Something deeper and more precise. Recognition. Dale had not groomed Grace the way predators groom children. There was nothing sexual, nothing abusive in the traditional sense. What Dale had done was more sophisticated and, in its own way, more terrible. He had groomed Grace's loyalty. He had spent years becoming the man she trusted, the man she associated with safety and kindness and warmth. He had planted himself in her childhood like a seed, knowing that someday If everything went wrong, he could harvest that trust and use it. And that is exactly what he was doing now. Through his son. Ryan was not improvising. He was executing a plan that had been drawn up in a prison cell, refined over 12 years of Saturday phone calls, and deployed with the precision of a military operation. Every kind word, every helpful gesture, every moment of false intimacy with Grace was scripted. Dale had written the playbook, and Ryan was running it. Walter picked up his phone and called Ron Caldwell. It was 2:14 in the morning. "He groomed my daughter," Walter said without preamble. "Not in the way you are thinking. He groomed her loyalty. When she was 10, 11, 12 years old, he was at my house every week I was away, building trust, making himself indispensable, turning my own daughter into a weapon he could use against me when the time came. And now his son is finishing the job." Ron was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was hard. Then we take them both down. But we do it right. Walt, we build a case so airtight that Dale Merrick spends the rest of his life in a cell. That is exactly what I intend to do." Walter hung up and sat in the dark kitchen, surrounded by photographs of a past he could no longer trust. Every memory of Dale was contaminated now. Every smile, every kindness, every moment of friendship that Walter had treasured for 30 years was revealed for what it really was: camouflage. Dale had never been his friend. Dale had been positioning himself, the way a predator positions itself near a waterhole, patient and still and waiting for the right moment to strike. Walter's phone rang. Frank Rossi, 3:27 in the morning. "Walt, I need you to sit down." "I'm sitting. I found something. About Margaret. About how she died." Frank's voice was different, slower. The voice of a man choosing his words because the wrong ones could break something. "You told me she died of cancer. Ovarian. Diagnosed in 2001, gone by 2002. That is correct. I had a contact pull her medical records. Ran them past 2 forensic pathologists I trust. Walt, they are saying the same thing. The symptom progression, the blood work, the way it moved through her body. It does not match a typical ovarian cancer timeline. It matches something else." "What does it match?" "Chronic poisoning. Slow, deliberate, administered over a period of 12 to 18 months. The kind of thing that mimics cancer symptoms so closely that no one would think to look for it unless they already suspected." The kitchen was completely silent. Walter could hear the refrigerator humming. He could hear a dog barking 3 houses away. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady and strong, the heart of a man who had survived everything the world had thrown at him. Everything except this. "Frank," Walter said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "Are you telling me that someone killed my wife?" "I'm telling you it is possible. And Walt, based on the timeline, based on who had access to Margaret during those months, there is really only one person it could have been." Walter already knew the name. He did not need Frank to say it. Frank Rossi's office was above a dry cleaner on Abercorn Street, a second-floor walk-up that smelled like starch and cigarette smoke. Walter climbed the stairs at 7:30 the next morning on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had spent the hours between Frank's phone call and dawn sitting at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood, staring at the wall, breathing. Frank was waiting with the file open on his desk. 2 cups of coffee, no small talk. "Sit down. Walt." Walter sat. Frank pushed a stack of photocopied medical records across the desk. Hospital admission forms, lab results, physician notes, pathology reports, pages and pages of Margaret's illness, reduced to ink and paper and the cold language of medicine. "I had 2 people look at this independently," Frank said. "Dr. Anna Chen at Emory, forensic toxicologist, and Dr. Robert Haynes, retired from the medical examiner's office in Fulton County. I did not tell either of them about Dale. I did not tell them anything except that I had a client who wanted a second opinion on cause of death." "What did they say?" "They both flagged the same things." Frank pointed at a line on the lab report. "Margaret's kidney function deteriorated in a pattern that is unusual for ovarian cancer. The liver markers are off. Her white blood cell count spiked 3 times during the final 8 months in a way that is consistent with her body trying to fight something that was not cancer. And there is this." He turned to another page. A note from her primary care physician, dated March of 2002. Margaret complained of a metallic taste in her mouth, persistent nausea that did not respond to the medications she was already on, tingling in her hands and feet. Her doctor attributed it to side effects of the cancer treatment, but it was not side effects. "Doctor, Chen says those symptoms are textbook indicators of arsenic exposure. Low dose, long duration. The kind that mimics chronic illness so perfectly that even a good doctor would not think to test for it, because they already had a diagnosis that explained everything." Walter stared at the file. The words on the page blurred and reformed and blurred again. Margaret had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of 2001. She died 14 months later, in the summer of 2002. Walter had been there through all of it. The hospital visits, the treatments, the slow erosion of the woman he loved. He had held her hand when she could no longer hold a cup. He had read to her when her eyes could no longer focus on the pages. He had slept in a chair beside her bed for the last 3 weeks, because he could not bear to be more than an arm's length from her, and Dale had been there too. "Tell me about Dale's access during that period," Frank said, though he already knew the answer. He needed Walter to say it. Walter's voice came from far away, like a man speaking from the bottom of a well. "Dale was at our house almost every day during Margaret's illness. He brought food, soups, casseroles, sometimes just coffee and pastries from the bakery Margaret liked. He said he wanted to help. He said it was the least he could do while I was trying to manage Grace and work and the hospital visits." Walter paused. A memory surfaced, so vivid it felt like a wound reopening. Dale standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove. Margaret in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, too thin, too pale, but smiling because Dale had brought her favorite tomato soup from the Italian place on Broughton Street. Except it was not from the Italian place. Dale had made it himself. Walter remembered because Margaret had said it tasted different, and Dale had laughed and said he added his own special touch. His own special touch. He made her soup, Walter said, and the words came out like ground glass. "He stood in my kitchen and made soup for my dying wife, and he smiled while he did it." Frank said nothing. There are moments when silence is the only response that does not make things worse. "Is this enough to prove it?" Walter asked. "No, not in court. The medical records raise questions, but they do not answer them. To get a definitive answer, you would need to exhume Margaret's remains and run a full toxicology panel. Arsenic deposits in bone and hair, even after 20 years. Then that is what we do. Walt, that is a long road. You need a court order. You need the cooperation of the county. And you need to be prepared for what they might find. I have been living with a lie for 22 years. Frank, I am prepared for the truth." Frank closed the file and looked at Walter for a long time. In 30 years of investigative work, he had delivered bad news to hundreds of people. Cheating spouses, stolen money, hidden identities. But he had never sat across from a man who had just learned that his best friend might have poisoned his wife while pretending to care for her. There was no protocol for that. No right thing to say. "Go home," Frank said quietly. "Be with Nadine. Let me work the Dale angle and the Ryan angle. I will have more by the end of the week." Walter stood. He picked up the file, then put it down, then picked it up again. His hands, those same hands that had held Margaret's as she slipped away, could not decide whether to carry the evidence of her murder or leave it behind. He carried it. The drive home took 22 minutes. Walter did not turn on the radio. He did not call Nadine. He drove through the streets of Savannah in absolute silence, past the hospital where Margaret had received her treatments, past the cemetery where she was buried beneath a headstone that read, "Beloved wife and mother," past the bakery on Broughton Street, where Dale used to pretend he bought soup that he had actually made with his own hands in Walter's kitchen. Every street held a memory. Every memory held a lie. Walter pulled into his driveway and sat in the truck with the engine off. His hands were still on the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. Through the windshield, he could see Nadine in the kitchen window, moving around the way she did in the mornings, slow and gentle, making the coffee he loved. He thought about Margaret. Not the Margaret who was sick. The Margaret before that. The Margaret who danced in the kitchen to Motown records and laughed so hard at her own jokes that she could not finish telling them. The Margaret who fell asleep on his shoulder every Sunday during the late movie and denied it every time. The Margaret who held his face in both hands the night Grace was born and whispered, "You are going to be the best father in the world." That Margaret had trusted Dale, had welcomed him into their home, had eaten the food he brought and thanked him for his kindness, and died believing she was surrounded by people who loved her. Walter tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his fingers ached, and he made a promise, not to Nadine, not to Grace, not even to himself, to Margaret. Walter walked into the house and closed the door behind him. Nadine was in the kitchen. He could hear her moving, the soft clink of a mug, the whisper of water filling the kettle. She called his name, but he did not answer. He walked past the kitchen, past the dining room, past the hallway where their wedding photograph hung beside Grace's high school graduation picture, and he stopped in front of the small shelf in the living room where Margaret's photograph had lived for 22 years. She was 27 in the picture. A Sunday afternoon in Forsyth Park, the October before they were married. Walter had taken the photograph with a disposable camera because he could not afford a real one yet, and Margaret had complained that her hair was a mess, and he had told her she was the most beautiful woman in Savannah, and she had laughed and said that was not saying much because she was the only woman in Savannah who would have him. Walter reached up and took the photograph from the shelf. He held it in both hands and carried it to the armchair by the window, the chair where Margaret used to sit in the evenings reading her paperback mysteries. The chair no one had sat in since she died, because Walter could never bring himself to tell anyone it was hers. He sat down in Margaret's chair for the first time in 22 years, and he held her photograph, and he spoke to her the way he had spoken to her every night before sleep, except this time he did not whisper. "Maggie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen." The house was quiet. Nadine had stopped moving in the kitchen. Perhaps she heard him. Perhaps she understood. "It's out when you were sick. I thought I was doing everything right. I was at every appointment. I held your hand through every treatment. I read to you when you could not read any more, and I stayed awake when you needed me to stay awake. And I tried. Maggie, I tried to keep you here." His voice did not break. Not yet. "My Dale came to the house almost every day. You remember? He brought flowers on Tuesdays because he said Tuesdays were ugly and flowers helped. He brought coloring books for Grace because she was scared and did not know how to say it. He sat with you on the porch when I had to drive to Washington, and he read to you from that book of poems you loved, the one with the blue cover. And when I came home, you always said the same thing. Thank God for Dale. I do not know what we would do without him." Walter looked down at Margaret's face in the photograph, young and bright and alive and trusting. "I believed that too. I believed he was there because he loved us, because he was our brother. I carried that belief for 22 years. Maggie, I carried it like a stone in my chest, heavy but good. The kind of weight that reminds you that you were not alone in the worst time of your life." He paused. Outside, a bird sang in the magnolia tree. The sound was obscene in its cheerfulness. But I was wrong. Dale was not there for love. He was there for something else. Something I cannot say out loud yet because saying it makes it real. And once it is real, I cannot go back to the version of the story where he was good. The version where you died of cancer, and your best friend held your hand, and your husband did everything he could, and it just was not enough. Walter's thumb traced the edge of the photograph. Margaret's smile. The way her eyes narrowed when she was happy. Like the joy was so big it squeezed the light in. Frank found your medical records. He showed them to 2 doctors who had no reason to lie. They say your symptoms do not match what the oncologist told us. They say something else was happening to you. Something that looked like cancer but was not. Something that came from outside, not inside. Something that someone put in your body, slowly, carefully, over months, while you sat in this house and trusted the people around you. He stopped. His jaw tightened. His eyes were dry. There are depths of grief so far below the surface that tears cannot reach them. Places where the pain is so absolute that the body simply stops trying to express it and goes still, like water at the bottom of the ocean, where even the current does not move. I do not know for certain yet. I may never know for certain. But I know who had the access and the motive and the patience to do this. And I know that the man who sat on our porch and read you poems and brought flowers on Tuesdays is the same man who has spent the last 6 weeks trying to destroy everything I have left. Walter set the photograph on his knee and placed his hand flat over Margaret's face. The way a man places his hand on a Bible before swearing an oath. If he did this to you, I will make it right. Not with anger, not with my hands, with the truth. I will drag every lie he has ever told into the light, and I will make him answer for all of it. Every forged review and every faked photograph and every poisoned bowl of soup and every minute of the 18 years he spent planning how to hurt us. I will do it the way you would have wanted. Clean, honest, and final. He lifted his hand and looked at her face one last time. I am sorry I did not see it. I am sorry I let him into our home. I am sorry I trusted him with you. But I promise you, Margaret Ann Briggs, that he will answer for what he did. To you, to Grace, to all of us. Walter placed the photograph back on the shelf. He stood in the living room for a moment, and then he picked up his phone and dialed Ron Caldwell. Ron, I need the FBI involved, formally. Not just a courtesy inquiry. I want a case opened. On what grounds? Dale Merrick may have murdered my wife 22 years ago, poisoned her over the course of 14 months while she was being treated for cancer. I have 2 independent forensic opinions that support the theory. I want her remains exhumed and tested. The line was silent for 5 full seconds. Walt, Ron said carefully, are you sure you want to go down this road? If they exhume Margaret and the tests come back negative, you will have put yourself and Grace through hell for nothing. And if they come back positive, I will have spent 22 years mourning my wife without knowing she was murdered by a man I called my brother. I can live with hell. Ron, I cannot live with not knowing. I will make the call. The Bureau will want to talk to you in person. I will be here. Walt, one more thing. Yes. Are you okay? Walter looked at Margaret's photograph on the shelf, at the magnolia tree outside, at Nadine standing in the kitchen doorway, watching him with eyes that were full of something deeper than worry. No, he said. I have not been okay for 20 years. I just did not know it until now. Nadine saw it the moment Walter came downstairs the next morning. She was standing at the counter slicing bread for toast, and she turned when she heard his footsteps, and she stopped. The knife hovering over the cutting board, the bread forgotten. He looked the same. Same face, same hands, same gray at the temples, but something behind his eyes had shifted overnight, the way a locked door changes when the deadbolt turns. You cannot see the mechanism move, but you know the door is no longer the same door. Walter, she said slowly, I have never seen you like this. Like what? Like whatever you are right now. Walter poured himself a cup of coffee and drank it standing, the way he used to drink coffee during operations, fast and purposeful, and already thinking 3 steps ahead. You have never needed to see me like this, he said. But Nadine, I need to tell you what is happening. All of it. And then I need you to trust me in a way I have never asked you to trust me before. He told her everything. Dale Merrick. The trafficking operation 18 years ago. The betrayal, the trial, the prison sentence. Ryan Merrick, Dale's son, posing as an attorney to get close to Grace. The grooming of Grace's loyalty during childhood. And then, in a voice so steady it frightened her, he told her about Margaret. Nadine sat down at the kitchen table and did not speak for a long time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. What do you need me to do? Stay here. Keep the restaurant running. Act normal. I do not want Dale to know that I know. Not yet. And Grace, I'm going to tell her today. She needs to know about Ryan before he gets any closer. She is 7 months pregnant. Walter. This could break her. Not telling her is worse. That boy is Dale's weapon. Every day she spends with him is another day Dale wins. Nadine reached across the table and took his hand. She squeezed it. Hard. The way she always did when she meant something too big for words. Walter spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table with his leather notebook and a legal pad, building a plan the way he had built operational strategies for 28 years. 3 fronts, 3 objectives, no margin for error. Front 1, Grace. Remove Ryan's access without alerting him. This meant telling Grace the truth, which meant shattering a piece of her world at the worst possible time. There was no gentle way to do it. But Walter knew from experience that hard truths delivered with love hurt less than soft lies delivered with intent. Front 2. Dale. Gather enough evidence to put him back in prison permanently. Frank Rossi was already working this angle, but Walter needed more. He needed the FBI. He picked up the phone and called Ron, who confirmed that the Bureau had agreed to open a preliminary inquiry based on the forensic opinions about Margaret. They were not promising anything yet, but they were looking. It was a start. Ron had more. His contact at the Bureau had flagged Dale's post-release communications. Dale had been in touch with 3 individuals connected to the same Eastern European trafficking network that put him away the first time. New phones, encrypted messaging, careful tradecraft, but not careful enough to escape the Bureau's signals intelligence. He is not just coming after you, Walt, Ron said. He is rebuilding his operation. The revenge against you is personal, but the trafficking connections are business. He is running both tracks at the same time, which means when the Bureau takes him down, it will not just be for harassment. It will be for conspiracy. That is the play. But we need patience. If we move too soon, he lawyers up and the trafficking case falls apart. How long? Weeks. Maybe less if he makes a mistake. His son is with my pregnant daughter. Ron, I do not have weeks. Then handle the son. Quietly. Pull him away from Grace without tipping off Dale. The Bureau handles the rest. Front 3. Margaret. The exhumation request was in motion. Ron had connected Walter with a federal prosecutor named Laura Hensley, who specialized in cold cases. She had reviewed the forensic opinions and agreed there was enough to petition a judge for an exhumation order. The process would take time, but Laura was expediting it. 3 fronts, 3 clocks ticking. And Walter at the center, holding all of it together with the same focus he had used to protect the most powerful people in the world. Except this time, the people he was protecting were his own. At 2:15 that afternoon, Walter drove to Grace's house. The drive took 40 minutes. He used every one of them to prepare what he would say, how he would say it, in what order the truths would come. There is an art to delivering devastating information. You do not start with the worst part. You build a foundation first. Context, facts, logic. And then, when the person is standing on solid ground, you show them the cliff. He turned onto Grace's street and his hands tightened on the wheel. Ryan's car was in the driveway, a silver sedan, clean and polished, parked behind Grace's minivan like it belonged there, like it had always been there. Walter pulled over 3 houses down and turned off the engine. Every instinct in his body fired at once. His jaw clenched. His pulse spiked. He could see the front door of Grace's house from here, and he imagined Ryan inside, sitting on Grace's couch, drinking Grace's coffee, touching Grace's shoulder with that practiced, calibrated gentleness that was not gentleness at all, but calculation. Dale Merrick's son, in his daughter's home, near his unborn grandchild. Walter's hand found the door handle. He could be at that front door in 30 seconds. He could have Ryan Cooper or Merrick or whatever his name was out of that house in 60. He had the training. He had the strength. And right now, God help him, he had the fury. But Walter Briggs did not survive 28 years by being the fastest man in the room. He survived by being the smartest. Smart, not angry. Precise, not impulsive. Win the war, not the battle. He let go of the door handle. He leaned back in his seat. He waited. 22 minutes later, the front door opened. Ryan walked to his car, phone in one hand, keys in the other, looking like every other 28-year-old in America who had somewhere to be and no idea he was being watched by a man who wanted to end him. The silver sedan pulled away. Walter watched it disappear around the corner. Then he started the truck, drove to Grace's house, and parked in the spot Ryan's car had just left. He walked to the front door. He knocked. Grace opened it, surprised and smiling and enormous with the baby. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Walter looked at his daughter, his little girl, the one he had packed lunches for and driven to school and read stories to and carried on his shoulders through every county fair in the state of Georgia. The one who still called him Daddy when she was scared or happy or both. "We need to talk, sweetheart, about everything." Grace made tea because that was what she did when she did not know what else to do. Walter sat on the couch and watched her move through the kitchen with one hand on her belly and the other reaching for mugs. And he thought about every version of this conversation he had rehearsed in the truck, and he threw them all away. There was no right way to do this. There was only the truth, and the truth was going to hurt. She set the tea on the coffee table and lowered herself into the armchair across from him. Her face was open, curious, a little worried. She had her mother's eyes. That was the thing Walter could never look at without feeling both joy and loss at the same time. "Dad, you are scaring me. What is going on?" Walter leaned forward. He rested his elbows on his knees and clasped his hands together, the way he used to sit when he was about to deliver a security briefing that no one wanted to hear. "Grace, do you remember Uncle Dale?" Her face softened. "Of course. Dale Merrick. He was your partner. He used to bring me coloring books when Mom was sick. He was so kind to us." He was not kind. He was performing. Grace blinked. "What do you mean?" Walter started at the beginning. He told her about Dale's work in the Secret Service and how, behind the badge and the smile, Dale had been taking money from a network of men who trafficked women and children across Eastern Europe. He told her about the months of investigation, the evidence he had gathered, the sleepless nights wondering if he was wrong about his best friend. He told her about the morning he turned in the file and watched Dale get arrested in the parking lot of the federal building, still wearing his service weapon, still carrying the coffee Walter had bought him 20 minutes earlier. Grace listened without moving. Her tea grew cold. "I sent my best friend to prison for 12 years, Walter said. "And I would do it again, because the alternative was letting him profit from the suffering of people who had no one else to fight for them." "Why did you never tell me this?" "Because you were 12. Because your mother had just died. Because you had already lost enough. And I did not want you to lose Uncle Dale, too. Grace's hand moved to her belly. An instinct. A protection. She did not yet know why. But something in her body already understood what was coming. Dale was released from prison 4 months ago, Walter continued. He has been living in Charleston, and he has been systematically destroying my life. The restaurant, the reviews, the forged photographs sent to Nadine, the children's services report, all of it was Dale. That is insane. How do you know? Because I hired people to find out, and because of something else. Walter reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a printed photograph. 2 images side by side. On the left, Dale Merrick at 28, taken from his Secret Service file. On the right, a photo Frank had obtained of Ryan Merrick, also 28. Same jawline, same smile, same eyes. And Dale has a son, Walter said. His name is Ryan Merrick. He changed his last name to his mother's maiden name after Dale went to prison. He paused. Grace. He goes by Ryan Cooper now. The color left her face like water draining from a sink. Slow, then all at once. No. He is not an attorney. He never was. He has no law degree, no license, no real estate credentials. He is Dale's son, and Dale sent him to get close to you. No, that is not possible. He helped me. He drove me to my appointments. He was kind to me. Dad. He was good. Walter's voice was gentle but immovable. That is exactly how his father was. Kind. Helpful. Patient. Good. Until he was not. Grace shook her head. Her hands were trembling now, both of them pressed against her belly like a shield. Why? Why would Dale do this through his son? What does he want? He wants to hurt me. And the most effective way to hurt me is through you. Because you are the thing I love most in this world. Grace opened her mouth to speak, and then Walter told her the last thing. The thing he had saved for the end because there was no way to soften it and no way to take it back once it was said. There is more, sweetheart, about your mother. He told her about the medical records, the forensic opinions, the arsenic, the soup, the flowers on Tuesdays. The man who sat on their porch and read poetry to Margaret while she was dying, who may have been the reason she was dying. Grace did not cry at first. She went very still, the way animals go still when the threat is too large to run from. Her eyes were wide and fixed on a point somewhere past Walter's shoulder, seeing something that was not in the room. Then her face crumpled, not all at once, but in pieces, like a wall coming down brick by brick. First the mouth, then the chin, then the eyes, and then she was sobbing, both hands on her belly. Rocking forward in the chair, Walter moved to her. He knelt on the floor in front of his daughter and wrapped his arms around her the way he had when she was small, one hand on the back of her head, the other on her shoulder, holding her together while she fell apart. "Why did you not tell me sooner?" she whispered between sobs. "Because I was trying to protect you, the way I have always tried. Even when I failed." Grace pulled back and looked at him. Her face was swollen. Her eyes were red. But beneath the grief, something was forming. Something hard and bright, like a diamond pressed from carbon. "You never failed me, Dad," she said. "Never. Not once in my entire life." Walter closed his eyes. Of all the words he had heard in 64 years, those 6 broke him and rebuilt him in the same breath. They sat together for a long time, father and daughter, on the floor of a living room where a man named Ryan Cooper had sat last week, drinking coffee and pretending to be something he was not. Then Grace's phone buzzed on the table, a text message. She reached for it and read it, and Walter watched her face change one more time. The softness vanished. The tears stopped. What replaced them was something Walter recognized, because he had seen it in the mirror 2 days ago. The message was from Ryan. "Hey, beautiful. Found the perfect crib for the nursery. Can I bring it by tomorrow?" Grace looked up at her father. Her voice was steady, cold, clear. "What do you need me to do?" The next 5 days moved like a machine. Walter operated on 3 hours of sleep a night, and the kind of focused calm that only comes when a man has nothing left to lose except the people he loves. Every conversation was strategic. Every decision was weighed against one question. Does this bring me closer to Dale? Ron Caldwell served as the bridge to the FBI. Special Agent Laura Hensley, the cold case prosecutor, had assembled a small team in the Savannah field office. They had Frank Rossi's evidence. They had the forensic opinions on Margaret. They had the flagged communications between Dale and known trafficking associates. And they had Ryan Merrick's real identity, confirmed through fingerprint records from a college arrest for public intoxication that Ryan had apparently forgotten about. "We have enough to arrest Dale Merrick today," Laura told Walter during a phone call on Monday afternoon. "Conspiracy, harassment, fraud, identity theft through his son. The trafficking connections add federal weight. But if you want the Margaret angle, we need more. We need him talking." "I can get him talking," Walter said. "I know how he thinks. He has been waiting 18 years to tell me what he did. He will not be able to resist. That is risky. If he realizes you are wearing a wire or that we are listening, he shuts down and lawyers up. He will not shut down. Dale needs me to know. That is his weakness. He does not just want to win. He wants me to watch him win." Laura paused. "How do you know that?" "Because I knew him for 15 years, and because a man who sends his own son to seduce his enemy's pregnant daughter is not a man who operates from logic. He operates from ego, and ego always talks." Laura agreed to the plan. Walter would initiate contact with Dale, arrange a meeting, and wear a recording device. FBI agents would be positioned outside the venue. If Dale incriminated himself, they would move in. But Walter had one more piece to place on the board. Elena Vasquez. He found her through a nonprofit called Bridges of Hope, an organization in Atlanta that provided services to survivors of human trafficking. It took 2 days of phone calls, a referral from Ron, and a conversation with the organization's director, who initially refused to connect Walter with any survivor without a formal request through law enforcement. Laura Hensley made the call. The director relented. Elena's voice on the phone was steady and careful. The voice of a woman who had learned to control every syllable because there had been a time in her life when she controlled nothing at all. "Mr. Briggs, they told me you have information about Dale Merrick." "I do. He is out of prison. He is operating again. And the FBI is building a case. What does this have to do with me? I am going to confront him, face to face. I want him to see the consequences of what he did, not just to me, but to the people he profited from. The people like you." The line went quiet for 10 seconds. Walter counted them. "I was 16 years old when they took me," Elena said. I spent 3 years in a basement in Bucharest before they moved me to the United States. I was sold 4 times. Dale Merrick signed the paperwork that made the second sale possible. I know this because I saw his name on a shipping manifest years later, during the trial. He never looked at me. Not once. I was not a person to him. I was a line item. Walter closed his eyes. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. Tell me where and when. Charleston. Friday night. A pub called O'Sullivan's. I will be there. While Walter prepared the confrontation, Grace played her part with a courage that made his chest ache. Under Walter's guidance, she agreed to meet Ryan one more time. She wore a blouse with a small recording device clipped inside the collar, provided by the FBI. She made coffee. She smiled. She let Ryan sit on her couch and talk about nursery furniture and school districts, and she let him believe that everything was exactly as it had been. And then, near the end of the visit, Grace mentioned Walter, casually, the way you drop a stone into a pond just to watch the ripples. My dad has been acting strange lately, really stressed about the restaurant. I am worried about him. Ryan leaned back and crossed his ankle over his knee. The mask slipped. Just for a moment. Just enough. Your grandfather will not be a problem much longer, he said, and then caught himself. I mean, the stress, the restaurant stress, it will work itself out. Grace held her smile. Her hands did not shake. She poured more coffee and changed the subject. And 20 minutes later, Ryan left with a wave and a promise to call tomorrow. The recording was clean. Laura Hensley confirmed it was admissible. Ryan's words, combined with the evidence of his false identity and his coordination with Dale, were enough to arrest him the moment the FBI gave the order. The pieces were set. Friday night. On Thursday evening, Walter sat in his living room and dialed a number Frank Rossi had obtained from Dale's phone records. It rang 4 times. Hello. The voice was older, rougher than Walter remembered, but unmistakable. Some voices you carry in your memory the way you carry scars, not because you want to, but because the wound went deep enough to leave a permanent mark. Dale. It is Walt. Silence. Then a laugh. Low. Slow. Satisfied. The laugh of a man who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Well. Walter Briggs. I was wondering when you would figure it out. It was O'Sullivan's. Tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. The table in the back corner, where we used to sit after shift. What makes you think I would come? Because you have been waiting 18 years to sit across from me and tell me what you did, and I am giving you that chance. Another laugh. You always did know me better than anyone. Walt, I will be there. Come alone. Likewise. And Walt, bring your appetite. We have a lot to catch up on. The line went dead. Walter set the phone down and exhaled. Nadine stood in the doorway. She had heard the call. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. Promise me you will come home, she said. Walter crossed the room and took her hands. He looked at the woman who had come into his life like a second sunrise, who had loved him through grief and silence, and now through this war he had not asked for and could not walk away from. I promise, he said. But first, I am going to make him face every sin he has ever committed. Every one. O'Sullivan's pub had not changed in 25 years. Same dark wood paneling, same brass rail along the bar, Same dim lighting that turned every face into half a shadow. The jukebox in the corner still played the same rotation of country songs that nobody chose and nobody complained about. It was the kind of place that survived not because it was special, but because it refused to be anything other than what it was. Walter arrived at 7:30. He chose the table in the back corner, the one near the emergency exit, the one with the cracked leather bench where he and Dale had sat 100 times after long shifts, drinking cheap whiskey and complaining about supervisors who had never worked a detail in their lives. He ordered 2 glasses of Maker's Mark, neat, one for himself, one for the man he had once loved like a brother and now intended to destroy. The recording device was taped to his chest beneath his shirt. Small, high fidelity, bureau issued. Ron Caldwell was in a van 2 blocks away, monitoring the feed in real time. Laura Hensley was in a second vehicle with 3 agents, ready to move on her signal. Elena Vasquez was in a rental car around the corner, waiting for Walter's text. Everything was in position. Now Walter had to do the hardest thing he had ever done in his career: sit still, listen, and let the enemy talk. Dale Merrick walked through the front door at 8:04, 4 minutes late. On purpose. Walter knew. Dale had always liked to make people wait. It was a small power move, the kind of thing that mattered to men who measured themselves by how much space they took up in a room. He looked older. Of course he did. 18 years older. 12 of them in a federal penitentiary. His hair was thinner, his face more angular. The skin around his eyes creased in a way that made him look like he had spent a long time squinting at something unpleasant. But the walk was the same. That loose, confident stride. Shoulders back, chin slightly raised. The walk of a man who believed he was the most important person wherever he went. He spotted Walter and smiled. Not a warm smile, a trophy smile. The smile of a hunter standing over what he had killed. Walter Briggs. Dale slid into the bench across from him and picked up the whiskey like it had been waiting for him his entire life. You look old. You look thin. Prison food. No one opens a restaurant in there. Dale sipped his drink and set it down. His eyes moved over Walter's face with the careful attention of a man cataloging damage. So, here we are. The table where it all started. Poetic. Is it not? You wanted to talk. Talk. Dale leaned back. He was enjoying this. Walter could see it in the way his fingers relaxed around the glass, the way his jaw loosened, the way his eyes took on a light that was not joy but something adjacent to it. Satisfaction. Control. The pleasure of a man who had spent 18 years imagining this exact moment and was finally living it. Where should I begin? The restaurant. That was my favorite part. Watching you scramble to save a business that was already dead. You know what the beautiful thing was? You worked harder. You woke up earlier. You cooked better. And none of it mattered. Because I was not attacking your food. I was attacking your reputation. And reputation is the one thing a man like you cannot rebuild with his hands. Walter said nothing. He let the silence do the work. The photographs were elegant. Do you not think? Dale continued. I hired a digital artist in Romania, if you can believe that. Same country where I used to do business. He created those images in 4 hours. Your wife believed them for almost a week. A week of doubt. A week of looking at you and wondering. That is all it takes. Walt. One crack. And the whole thing comes apart. And the Children's Services report, Dale's smile widened. That was personal. I wanted to take the one thing you were looking forward to more than anything, that grandchild. I wanted you to feel what it is like to have someone reach into your life and take the thing you love most. The way you did to me. Walter's hands were flat on the table. His face was stone. Every word Dale spoke was being captured in crystal-clear audio by the device on his chest, transmitted in real time to a federal prosecutor sitting 2 blocks away. And Grace? Walter asked. Sending your son after my pregnant daughter. Was that personal too? Something flickered in Dale's eyes. Surprise, maybe. He had not expected Walter to know about Ryan. Ryan is a good boy, Dale said carefully. He did what I asked, because he understands loyalty. Something you never did. I was loyal to my country, and to the women and children your friends were selling. Dale's face hardened. Do not lecture me about morality. Walt, you have no idea what the world looks like from inside a cell. You sit in your little restaurant, in your little town, with your little wife, and you think you are righteous. You think turning me in made you a hero. It made you a traitor. You betrayed your brother. You were taking money from human traffickers. Dale, I was surviving. People died. Dale waved his hand, dismissing the dead the way a man swats a fly. Collateral damage. Everyone in that business understood the risks. Walter leaned forward. This was the moment. The one he had driven 80 miles for. The one that Margaret deserved. Speaking of collateral damage, Walter said, his voice low and even. Margaret, Dale went still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from surprise. The kind that comes from recognition. The kind that comes when a man hears the name of someone he has tried very hard not to think about. What about Margaret? You were at our house every day when she was sick, cooking for her, feeding her, bringing her soup and flowers and poetry books. Everyone thought you were being kind. I was being kind. Were you? Dale held Walter's gaze. The silence between them was a living thing, pressing against the walls of the pub, filling the space between the 2 whiskey glasses like smoke. She was collateral damage, Dale said finally. You should have minded your own business. Walt, everything that happened, everything, is because you could not leave well enough alone. Not a confession. Not exactly. But close enough to make a prosecutor's heart race and a jury's stomach turn. Walter held Dale's eyes for 3 more seconds. Then he reached under the table and sent a single text message. Now. The front door of O'Sullivan's opened. A woman walked in. She was 40 years old, dark-haired, dressed simply in a gray coat. She was not tall. She was not imposing. But she carried herself with the kind of stillness that comes from having survived something that should have killed her. Dale looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Then his face changed. The color drained from it like light leaving a room at sunset. Slowly, and then all at once. He recognized her. Elena Vasquez stopped 3 feet from the table. She did not sit. She did not need to. Some things are said better from a height, looking down at the person who deserves to feel small. Dale's mouth opened. No sound came out. His hand was still wrapped around his whiskey glass, but his fingers had gone white. He stared at Elena the way a man stares at a door he thought was locked when it swings open in the middle of the night. Do you remember me? Elena said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. The pub was quiet. The jukebox had stopped between songs, and the bartender was polishing a glass with the careful disinterest of a man who sensed that something important was happening and wanted no part of it. "I did not think you would," Elena continued. "I was 16 when they took me. 16 years old, walking home from school in Bucharest. A van, 2 men, 8 hours in the back of a truck with 11 other girls. None of us older than 19. We were inventory, product, numbers on a spreadsheet." Dale's eyes darted to Walter, then back to Elena. His jaw worked, but still no words. "I spent 3 years in basements and locked rooms. 3 years being sold to men who paid cash and never asked my name. And then they moved me to the United States, because business was expanding. Because men like you made it possible." "I do not know what you are talking about," Dale said, but his voice had no conviction. It was the voice of a man reciting a line he had practiced but no longer believed. "Your name was on the manifest," Elena said. "The second time I was sold, in 2000, your signature authorized the transport documents. I know because the prosecution showed me the paperwork during the trial. You signed your name next to a column of numbers, and one of those numbers was mine. 47. I was number 47. 16 years old. 51 kilograms. Romanian national. That is what I was to you." A line on a piece of paper worth $800. Dale pushed back from the table. The bench scraped against the floor. "I am leaving." "No," Walter said. "You are not." Dale stood anyway, turning toward the door, and that is when the door opened again. Not Elena this time. Ron Caldwell, badge visible on his belt, followed by 3 agents in dark jackets with the letters FBI in yellow across the chest. Ron's face was carved from granite. He had driven from Savannah for this. He had sat in a van for 2 hours listening to Dale Merrick confess to destroying his friend's life. And now he was going to do the thing he had wanted to do since the moment Walter called him at 5:30 in the morning a week ago. "Dale Merrick," Ron said. "You are under arrest. Conspiracy to commit harassment, fraud, identity theft, filing false reports, and conspiracy to engage in human trafficking. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Dale stopped. He stood between the table and the door, between the past and the future, between the whiskey he had not finished and the handcuffs that were already coming out of Ron's jacket. He looked at the agents. He looked at Ron. And then he looked at Walter. The hatred in his eyes was absolute, pure. The kind that burns with no smoke, the kind that lives in a man's bones and never cools. But beneath it, for the first time, there was something else. Recognition, not remorse. Dale Merrick was not capable of remorse, but recognition. The dawning understanding that the game was over, that every card had been played, and that he had lost. "You destroyed me," Dale said. Again, Walter stood. He buttoned his jacket slowly, the way a man does when he is in no hurry, because the hard part is already done. He looked at Dale Merrick, the man who had stood beside him at his wedding, who had held his daughter as an infant, who had brought flowers to his dying wife on Tuesdays, and soup that may have been killing her, who had spent 18 years in a cell turning his hatred into a weapon and his son into a soldier, who had tried to take everything Walter loved and nearly succeeded. "No, Dale," Walter said. "You destroyed yourself. Both times. The first time, You chose money over the lives of women and children. This time, you chose revenge over whatever was left of your soul. I did not make those choices. You did. And you will live with them for the rest of your life. Dale said nothing. An agent took his arm, then the other arm. The handcuffs clicked, and the sound was small and final, like a period at the end of a very long sentence. They led him out. The night air rushed in through the open door, cold and clean, carrying the smell of rain that had just started falling. Walter watched Dale walk through the doorway, flanked by agents, head down, shoulders curled inward, smaller than Walter had ever seen him. Elena stood by the bar, watching too. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Her face was still. When the door closed behind Dale, she let out a breath she had been holding for 24 years. "Thank you," Walter said to her. "Do not thank me. I did not do this for you." She paused. "I did it for number 47, and for all the others who never got the chance to look him in the eye." She shook Walter's hand once, firmly, and walked out into the rain without looking back. Ron Caldwell appeared beside Walter. He smelled like coffee and adrenaline in the leather interior of a surveillance van. His face was tired but satisfied. "It is over, Walt." Walter looked at the table where 2 whiskey glasses still sat, one empty, one untouched. The table where he and Dale had sat as young men, full of ambition and trust, and the belief that the bond between them was unbreakable. 25 years ago, they had clinked glasses at this table and promised to have each other's backs for life. Funny how life works. Walter stepped outside. The rain was coming down steadily now. The kind of autumn rain that Savannah sent up the coast to Charleston, like a reminder that nothing stays dry forever. The street was empty except for the FBI vehicles and the flashing lights reflecting off wet pavement. Dale was already in the back of a sedan, a dark shape behind tinted glass, disappearing into the machinery of federal justice for the second and final time. Ron followed Walter out and stood beside him under the awning. "I said it is over." Walter watched the sedan pull away. The red taillights blurred in the rain, then turned a corner and were gone. "Not yet," Walter said quietly. "Not until Margaret gets justice." Ron put a hand on Walter's shoulder. They stood like that for a long time. 2 old men in the rain, outside a pub where everything had begun and everything had ended, watching the street slowly empty and the night slowly settle, listening to the sound of water falling on a city that did not know and would not care that something important had just happened inside its walls. Walter turned up his collar and walked to his truck. He had a long drive home. Nadine was waiting. Grace was waiting. And somewhere in a cemetery in Savannah, Margaret was waiting too. He started the engine and drove south through the rain, toward the people he loved and the promise he had made. The truth moved through Savannah the way weather moves through the low country, slow at first, then everywhere at once. By Monday, the Chatham County District Attorney had issued a public statement confirming the arrest of Dale Merrick on federal charges. By Tuesday, the local news had the story. Former Secret Service agent arrested in elaborate revenge plot against colleague. By Wednesday, Walter's phone had not stopped ringing. The first call that mattered came from Pastor James Coleman. "Oh, Walter, I would like to come by the house if that is all right with you." He arrived at 10 in the morning, dressed the way he always dressed, dark suit, white shirt, Bible in one hand, and a covered dish in the other. Nadine let him in and offered coffee. He accepted the coffee and declined the seat. "I will stand for this," he said, "because what I have to say, I should say on my feet." He set the dish on the counter and turned to Walter. "I owe you an apology, not just from me, from the entire congregation. We received anonymous letters about you, terrible things, accusations that I should have questioned, that I should have brought to you directly instead of letting them settle into my mind like dust. I failed you as a pastor and as a friend, and I am deeply ashamed." Walter looked at the man who had shaken his hand every Sunday for 15 years, who had prayed with him at Margaret's funeral, who had officiated his wedding to Nadine in the same church where they first met. "You believed what you were designed to believe. Jim, the man who wrote those letters, spent 12 years in prison learning how to manipulate people. You were not the only one who fell for it. That does not excuse it, no, but it explains it. And explanation is enough for me." Pastor Coleman's eyes were wet. He shook Walter's hand with both of his, the way he used to, firm and long, and he left the covered dish on the counter. It was peach cobbler, Nadine's favorite. The neighbors came next, not all at once, and not all of them, but enough. Bill Henderson called to apologize for canceling the fishing trip. Mrs. Patterson brought flowers and stood on the porch for 10 minutes trying to find the right words before finally saying, "I am sorry, Walter. I should have known better." Others sent cards. Some just waved from across the street, a little slower than before, a little more deliberately, like they were trying to say something their mouths could not manage. Walter accepted each apology the same way, with grace, without bitterness, and without pretending it did not matter. Because it did matter. Every turned back and averted eye had cut him, and pretending otherwise would have been another kind of lie. And Walter was done with lies. On Thursday, Ron Caldwell called with news. Ryan Merrick had been arrested at his apartment in Savannah. He had offered no resistance and asked for a lawyer before the agents finished reading his rights. He would face charges of fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and filing false reports. His cooperation with Dale's campaign against Walter was documented in over 300 text messages recovered from an encrypted phone the FBI had seized. "The kid never had a chance," Ron said. "Dale poisoned him the same way he poisoned everything else, fed him hatred from the time he could walk. By the time Ryan was old enough to know better, he did not know how." Walter thought about that. A boy raised on his father's rage, shaped into a weapon before he was old enough to choose. It was almost pitiable. Almost. "And Margaret?" Walter asked. "Laura Hensley filed the exhumation petition yesterday. The judge is expected to sign it within 2 weeks. The forensic team is on standby." 2 weeks. I know it feels long, Walt, but it is happening. Walter hung up and sat with the weight of it. 22 years. He had carried the grief of Margaret's death for 22 years, and in 2 weeks, he would know whether that grief needed to be rewritten entirely. whether the woman he mourned had been taken from him not by God or nature, but by a man who had sat at their kitchen table and smiled. He was not afraid of the answer. He was afraid of the silence after, the space where the old story used to live. The version where Margaret died of cancer and Dale was a good friend and the world, while cruel, at least made sense. If the tests came back positive, that version would die too, and Walter would have to build a new one from nothing. That Friday evening, Briggs's place reopened. Nadine had spent the day cleaning and restocking, and Walter had been in the kitchen since noon, prepping shrimp and chopping herbs and doing the thing that always brought him back to himself: cooking. The simple alchemy of heat and salt and time. By 6 o'clock, every table was full, not just the regulars, new faces too. People who had read the news and wanted to eat at the restaurant that Dale Merrick had tried to destroy. People who showed up not because the food was extraordinary, though it was, but because showing up was a way of saying something. We are here. We believe you. You are not alone. Nadine stood beside Walter at the pass window, watching the dining room fill. She had not said much all day, but now she turned to him, and her eyes were full of something that was not quite joy and not quite sorrow, but the fragile, luminous thing that lives between them. I doubted you, she said. In the worst moment of your life, when you needed me most, I doubted you. I do not know how to forgive myself for that. Walter set down his spatula and took her hands. They were warm from the kitchen, dusted with flour, trembling slightly. He designed it that way. Nadine, he studied you. He knew about Thomas. He knew exactly where to put the knife, and he twisted it. That is not your failure. That is his crime. But I should have known. I should have trusted. You did trust. It just took you a few days to remember. And when you remembered, you came to the garage and sat beside me in the dark, and you said the words that saved my life. Someone is doing this to us. You were the first person to see the truth. That matters more than the doubt that came before it. Nadine pressed her forehead against his chest. He held her. Around them, the kitchen hummed. The dining room laughed. The restaurant that Dale Merrick had tried to kill was alive and full and loud, with the sound of people eating and talking and being together. Everything Dale had tried to destroy was still standing, damaged, scarred, changed, but standing. Walter's phone rang at 11:43 that night. He was in bed. Nadine asleep beside him. The house quiet for the first time in weeks. He reached for the phone and saw Grace's name on the screen. Dad. Her voice was tight, excited, scared. The voice of a woman standing on the edge of the biggest moment of her life. It is time. The baby is coming. Walter drove through the streets of Savannah at 2 a.m, with his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Not from fear, not from cold, from something older and deeper than either. The kind of trembling that comes when the body understands what is happening before the mind can find the words for it. The streets were empty. The live oaks stood in the dark like old sentries, their branches heavy with moss, their roots buried so deep in the savanna soil that nothing short of a hurricane could move them. Walter had always loved these trees. They reminded him of the kind of man he wanted to be. Patient, rooted, still standing when the storm passed. He turned onto Bonaventure Road, and the cemetery appeared on his left. Wrought iron gates, white stone, the soft shapes of monuments visible in the glow of a half-moon. Margaret was buried in the third row, beneath a live oak of her own, beside a headstone that read, Margaret Ann Briggs, beloved wife and mother, 1963 to 2002. Walter slowed the truck, but did not stop. He rolled down the window, and the night air came in, warm and thick with the smell of jasmine and wet earth. She is coming. Maggie, he whispered. Our granddaughter is coming tonight. He drove on. The hospital was 12 minutes away. Nadine's car was already in the parking lot. She had left the house before him, moving faster because she had been dressed and ready for this moment for weeks. A bag packed by the door. Her phone charged every night to 100%. Her shoes set beside the bed so she could step into them without turning on the light. Walter parked and walked through the automatic doors into the bright, humming world of the maternity ward. The smell of antiseptic and floor wax and something faintly sweet that might have been baby powder. A nurse pointed him toward the waiting area, and there was Nadine, sitting in a plastic chair with her hands clasped in her lap, looking up when she heard his footsteps. She is in the delivery room, Nadine said. Kevin is with her. The doctor says everything is going well. Walter sat down beside his wife and took her hand. They waited. Waiting in a hospital is a particular kind of time. It does not move the way normal time moves. It stretches and compresses and loops back on itself, and the minutes feel like hours. And then suddenly, an hour passes like a breath. Walter sat in that strange, elastic time and let his mind drift backward, the way it always did in quiet moments, to the only other night that had felt like this one. 34 years ago, a different hospital, a different city, a different life. Walter was 30 years old and terrified. He sat in a chair exactly like this one, in a hallway exactly like this one, wearing the same expression he imagined he was wearing now, the wide-eyed, helpless look of a man who has suddenly realized that the world is about to change in a way he cannot prepare for. Margaret had been in labor for 11 hours. He had held her hand through every one of them. At some point she had squeezed so hard she left bruises on his fingers, and he had not said a word because what was a bruise compared to what she was doing? He remembered the sounds, the breathing, the nurses' voices, calm and rhythmic. Margaret's voice, fierce and exhausted and unstoppable. And then Grace arrived, 6 pounds, 14 ounces, screaming like she had something important to say and no intention of waiting. The doctor placed her on Margaret's chest, and Margaret looked down at this tiny, furious creature and laughed. Actually laughed. Through the sweat and the tears and the exhaustion, she laughed, because that was who Margaret was. She found joy in the middle of everything. Then Margaret looked at Walter and said the words he had carried with him every day since. "She is perfect. Walt, look at what we made." He had looked, and he had known, in that instant, that nothing in his life would ever matter more than this. Not his career, not his ambitions, not the world and all its noise. Just this woman, this child, this family. Now, 34 years later, in another hospital hallway, holding another woman's hand, Walter closed his eyes and let that memory settle over him like a blanket. Margaret was gone. The grief was permanent, like a room in a house that you close the door to, but never demolish. But the love that had built that room was still alive. It was alive in Grace, who had her mother's laugh and her mother's stubborn courage. And in a few minutes, it would be alive in someone new. A door opened. A nurse appeared, smiling the kind of smile that only maternity nurses have. The smile of someone who witnesses miracles on a regular basis and never gets tired of it. "Mr. Briggs, congratulations. Grandpa, would you like to meet your granddaughter?" Walter stood on legs that did not feel entirely solid. Nadine squeezed his arm. They walked together down the hallway, past rooms where other families were living their own versions of this moment, and into the room where Grace lay propped against pillows, exhausted and radiant, holding a bundle so small it seemed impossible that it could contain an entire new life. "Dad," Grace said, and her voice cracked in the most beautiful way. "Come here." Walter crossed the room. Grace lifted the bundle and placed it into his arms with the care of someone transferring the most precious thing in the world, which is exactly what she was doing. The baby weighed almost nothing, a warm, impossibly light weight against his chest. He looked down and saw a face so small and so new that it seemed to belong to a different species entirely, one that had not yet learned about pain or loss or betrayal or any of the things that waited outside these walls. Her eyes were closed. Her fists were clenched. Her mouth moved in tiny, involuntary motions, practicing for a life she did not yet know she was living. "What is her name?" Walter asked, and his voice was not steady, and he did not care. Grace smiled, the same smile, Margaret's smile, the one that squeezed the light in. "Her name is Margaret," Grace said. "After Mom. So every time you hold her, you will remember that Mom is still here, in all of us." Walter looked down at the baby in his arms. Margaret. Little Margaret. Named for a woman who had danced in the kitchen and laughed at her own jokes and held his face in both hands and told him their daughter was perfect. Named for a woman who had died too young and been mourned too long and deserved more justice than the world had given her. He carried the baby to the window. Outside, the sky was changing. The darkness was thinning at the edges, giving way to a pale blue that deepened into gold along the horizon. Dawn was coming to Savannah, the way it always did, slow and warm and unreasonably beautiful. Walter stood at the window with his granddaughter in his arms and watched the sun rise. The light touched her face first, then his. Two people separated by 64 years and connected by everything that mattered. Behind him, Grace was crying softly. Nadine had her arm around Grace's shoulders. Kevin stood in the corner, quiet and proud. The way new fathers stand when they realize the world has just expanded beyond anything they imagined. And Walter held the baby named Margaret and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too small a word. This was completion, the sense that every road he had walked, every sacrifice he had made, every wound he had carried, had led him to this window, this sunrise, this impossibly small person sleeping against his chest. Two Margarets, one who had left, one who had just arrived, and Walter standing between them, the bridge between memory and hope. Holding both in his arms, 6 months passed, the kind of months that heal without announcing it, the way skin closes over a wound so slowly you only notice when you stop checking. The restaurant was busier than it had ever been. Walter had hired a sous chef, a young woman named Priya who could break down a whole fish in 90 seconds and who called Walter chef, even though he told her 100 times to call him Walt. Nadine managed the front of house with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had found her place in the world and intended to keep it. Grace and Kevin had moved into a house 4 blocks from the restaurant. Close enough for Walter to walk over with leftovers. Close enough for little Margaret to grow up knowing the smell of her grandfather's kitchen. She was 6 months old now, with dark hair like her grandmother and a grip that could stop traffic. Walter held her every chance he got. In the mornings before the restaurant opened, in the evenings after it closed, on Sundays after church, while Nadine talked to Pastor Coleman and Grace chased the neighborhood cat away from the stroller. It was on a Tuesday that the letter arrived. Walter found it in the mailbox between a water bill and a flyer for a mattress sale. A plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Institution in Yazoo City, Mississippi. He knew what it was before he opened it. The same way you know what a phone call at 3 in the morning means before you pick up. He carried it inside and sat at the kitchen table. Nadine was at the restaurant. The house was quiet. Little Margaret's blanket was draped over the arm of the couch, and a pacifier sat on the coffee table, and the air smelled faintly of the lavender oil Grace used to help the baby sleep. The ordinary details of an ordinary life, surrounding an envelope that was anything but. He opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, the kind they give you in prison, and a printed notice from the Bureau of Prisons. Dale Merrick had died 11 days ago. Lung cancer. Diagnosed 4 months after his arrest. Advanced by the time they found it. Untreatable by the time they tried. He had spent his last weeks in the prison infirmary, and he had died the way he had lived, without asking for help from anyone. The letter was handwritten. Dale's handwriting had not changed. The same sharp, angular strokes Walter remembered from the field reports they used to file together. The same impatient slant that always made it look like the words were trying to leave the page. Walter read it once, slowly. Walt, I am not writing this to apologize. I do not believe in apologies. They are just words people say to make themselves feel better about the things they cannot undo. So I will not say I am sorry. I will say something else instead. I hated you for 18 years. Every day. Every single day. I hated you when I woke up, and I hated you when I fell asleep, and I hated you in the hours between when there was nothing to do but sit in a cell and remember what my life used to be before you took it from me. I planned everything, every review, every letter, every photograph, every phone call Ryan made to your daughter. I planned it the way you taught me to plan operations. Methodical, layered, patient. And when it started working, when your restaurant emptied and your wife doubted and your neighbors turned away, I felt something I had not felt in years. Joy. But then something happened that I did not plan for. Last week, for the first time in 18 years, I dreamed about their faces, not yours, theirs, the women, the girls, the ones in the shipping containers, the ones in the basements, the ones whose names I never learned because I never asked, because asking would have made them real. And if they were real, then what I did was real too. I woke up at 3 a.m, and I could not go back to sleep. I lay in the dark, and I saw their faces, and I understood, for the first time, why you did what you did. Maybe you were right. Maybe what I was doing was wrong, and maybe the man who stopped me was not a traitor, but something else. Something I do not have a word for. Because the vocabulary of a man who has spent his life running from the truth does not include words for the people who stand in front of it. I will never say this to your face. I am too proud and too broken and too close to the end to give you that satisfaction. But I am writing it here because the dead do not lie, and I will be dead before this reaches you. And the only honest thing I have left is this pencil and this paper and the faces that will not let me sleep. Dale. Walter read the letter twice. Then he folded it along the creases and held it in his lap for a long time. Outside, a cardinal landed on the magnolia branch and sang 3 notes before flying away. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. The world continued its ordinary turning, indifferent to the small earthquake happening inside one man's chest. He did not cry. He had done his crying. What he felt now was something quieter than grief and steadier than relief. It was the recognition that even in the darkest corner of a man's soul, a seed can survive. Not grow, not bloom, but survive. And sometimes survival is enough. Walter stood up and walked to the garage. He opened the metal box on the bottom shelf, the one that held his leather notebook and the photograph of 2 young men in matching suits. He placed Dale's letter inside, next to the photograph, and he closed the lid. Then he slid the box to the back of the shelf and walked away. The past lived there now. He did not need to visit it anymore. He stepped out onto the back porch. The afternoon sun was warm on his face. In the yard, Nadine was kneeling beside her herb garden, pulling weeds with the patient concentration of a woman who understood that growing things required both effort and surrender. Grace sat on the porch steps with little Margaret on her lap, pointing at a butterfly and narrating its movements with the kind of gentle nonsense that babies love and adults forget they need. Walter lowered himself into the porch chair and watched them. 3 women. 3 generations. The living proof that everything he had fought for was worth the cost. He thought about the past year, the broken window, the red words on the wall, the empty restaurant and the cold church, and the photographs, and the tears in the garage. He thought about Dale and Ryan and Elena and the Quan Bar in Charleston, where a friendship died for the second and final time. He thought about Margaret, the first one, buried beneath a live oak in Bonaventure Cemetery, waiting for the truth that the FBI would deliver in its own slow time, and he thought about what it means to do the right thing. It is not easy. Lord knows it is not easy. Doing the right thing cost Walter his best friend, his peace, nearly his wife, nearly his daughter, and 22 years of living with a grief that may have been built on a lie. Doing the right thing does not come with a guarantee or a reward or even a thank you. Sometimes it comes with a broken window and a message in red paint. But here is what Walter Briggs knew at 64. Sitting on his porch in the golden light of a Savannah afternoon, watching his granddaughter reach for a butterfly. Doing the right thing is not about what it costs. It is about what it leaves behind. It leaves behind a man who can look in the mirror without flinching. A father whose daughter says, "You never failed me." A grandfather whose namesake will grow up knowing that the people who loved her chose truth over comfort and courage over silence every single time. God gives us all a choice between the easy road and the right road. Walter had taken the right road, and the right road had nearly destroyed him, but it did not. Because the right road, for all its pain, leads somewhere. It leads to a porch in the sun, and a wife in the garden, and a daughter on the steps, and a baby named Margaret reaching for something beautiful. And that, in the end, is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. If this story reached your heart, if it made you think about the choices that define a man's life, I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me about a time when doing the right thing cost you something, and whether you would do it again. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone fighting their own battle, someone standing at their own crossroads, share it with them. Sometimes the right story finds us at exactly the right moment. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you have not already, please subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. And God bless you, every one of you, for being here. I will see you in the next one.